Over the past week, I went back and played Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier and Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, two PSP spin-offs from some of the best PlayStation 2 platformers ever made. Both of these games have a rough reputation, but after going back and actually playing them, one of them surprised me. So the question is, which PSP spin-off aged worse? Starting with Ratchet & Clank, and yeah, this is a very simple story, especially compared to the PS2 games. Probably the thing that annoyed me the most was the whole Technomite setup, because the trap that they used on Ratchet was so obvious. There is no way that the Ratchet that we've been playing for the past 4 games would have fallen for something like this. It honestly feels like they just dropped his IQ by about 50 points, and his personality, he just isn't the same person here. And then you've got the whole Technomites themselves as the villains. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't remember them ever being mentioned before. Yet the game treats them like they've always been a big deal. But now for Jak and Daxter, and this one's just kind of weird. Out of nowhere, all of the eco types are back after basically disappearing in the previous games, and then they go with the lamest thing ever, Sky Pirates. I will say though, at least they tried to connect back to the original games with eco and the precursor stuff. But the characters are off here too. Daxter feels basically the same, but Jak himself just turns into this generic good guy. All of that edge from the previous 2 games is just completely gone here. And this game actually messes with the lore from the previous games. One thing that I will address is that in Jak 3, Dark Eco is meant to turn the precursors into Dark Makers, but here it just turns Daxter into this. So yeah, neither of these stories are great by any stretch, but I do think Jak just about takes it, purely because it actually tries to build on what came before, even if it does it poorly. Starting with Jak, and honestly, what they've done here is kind of criminal. I get that it is a smaller console with fewer buttons, but when you compare them side by side to the PS2 games, it feels awful. Every movement ability feels stiff, like Jak is basically a plank of wood. The animations are completely gone here, and there's even a slight delay from when you push these buttons that just makes everything feel worse. And somehow the only real combo that was left was the punch into an uppercut, and even that has no weight behind it. They did add some new eco abilities with the original colors, which is actually pretty cool in theory, but it just doesn't feel right. It's like the game is wearing the skin of Jak. Everything looks similar, but it doesn't control anything like it used to. And that's a huge problem because movement is a core fundamental of the Jak and Daxter games. But now moving on to Ratchet and Clank, and honestly, I don't know if the bar was just set that low after Jak, but this one felt actually pretty decent. It's definitely not perfect. The controls are definitely stiffer than the PS2 games, and the camera can be pretty rough at times. But the important thing is strafing is here, and that's such a core part of Ratchet's movement that immediately makes it feel like a proper Ratchet game. At its core, it really does feel like a smaller, downgraded version of Ratchet and Clank, and honestly, it's not the worst thing. Yes, the turning can feel a bit slow, and the controls are nowhere near as smooth as they used to be, but overall, I still think it works. So I didn't love it, but I definitely didn't hate it either. And compared to Jak, this one easily goes to Ratchet. Starting with Jak, and I will start with what I actually did like. The new eco abilities were really cool, and honestly, I wish they had added stuff like this into Jak 2 and 3. I also liked the upgrade system with Kira, where you could boost your health and stats. It gave the game a small RPG feel, which was a nice touch. But the guns. I am not a fan of these at all. It's the same 3 weapons from the previous games, but for a 4th weapon, they added a green eco grenade launcher, which really feels wrong. Green eco has never been used offensively before. And there's also a large delay between the shots, especially with the blaster, and it just makes everything feel sluggish. That said though, I did like mixing the eco powers with the guns to output more damage. I did find the most effective strategy though was just to punch into the blaster shots. It just stun locks them and you can melt them down. But onto Ratchet and Clank, and there's not a lot to say here because it's basically just Ratchet and Clank combat. I really like the armor system. Being able to swap between different types of armor in and out felt pretty unique, but this game definitely gets brutal. Enemies start hitting insanely hard. At points, I was just getting one shot, and that's where my main issue comes in, because even when I was upgrading weapons, it still felt like they were doing no damage, even early on. Some of these enemies would just tank shots, like taking 4 rocket launcher hits to kill a basic enemy. But despite that, it does feel the most like classic Ratchet. The guns feel weaker than I remember, but the overall combat system works better. So yeah, this one goes to Ratchet. Starting with Jak again, they did try to bring back the seamless open world from the previous 2 games, but honestly, it just falls completely flat here. Flying around feels really boring. I never felt drawn to explore anything in the open world, and instead of adding to the experience, it just feels like it bloats the runtime of the game, especially since you're constantly hopping between locations with your ship, which also comes with a bunch of load screens. The actual levels themselves too are really basic. They are simple platforming for the most part. There are some eco puzzle sections that are actually kind of fun, especially the teleporting mechanics, but that's probably the only real highlight for me. But the worst part has to be the Jak Daxter sections. These were a weird semi top-down level. They were just tedious, and every time that they popped up, I dreaded it. Now on to Ratchet and Clank, and I think they actually did a decent job with the classic planet hopping structure here. Basic platforming is still there, and you're constantly using gadgets to get around each world, which keeps things feeling familiar. That said, I really didn't like the gimmick levels in this game. The hoverboard sections and the weird Clank arena parts especially did not work for me. The controls just feel stiff and they are not fun to play. But outside of those few gimmicks, I think Ratchet sticks the closest to what made the originals work. So for me, this one goes to Ratchet. And this one actually surprised me because for how much these games fall short in every other area, I actually think the music is pretty strong overall. Ratchet definitely feels similar to the older games, but I don't think it really hits as hard or has anything as memorable as the PS2 soundtracks. It's fine, it's just something that I didn't really remember after playing. Now for Jak, I actually really liked the more dramatic tone that they went for here. In fact, it might genuinely be the one standout redeeming qualities of this game. It has a more serious cinematic feel, and I think it fits that world pretty well. That said, both games have a pretty big issue when it comes to sound effect design, especially with the weapons. None of these guns feel punchy or satisfying. Everything just sounds kind of flat and weak. But overall, purely on music and atmosphere, I think that this one goes to Jak. Neither of these games really live up to their PS2 counterparts. That's pretty clear from every part of this comparison. Jak tries to do a lot more with its story, world, and ideas, but it ends up feeling messy, inconsistent, and actually not a lot of fun to play. While Ratchet is more safe and simple, but at least it still feels like a Ratchet and Clank game. The movement, combat, and structure are still recognizable, even if they are a downgrade. And that's kind of where I land on this. If I had to pick one that still holds up, I definitely would give it to Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. Not because it's amazing, but because it actually feels like the series that it came from. Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier just strays way too far from what made those original games special. But honestly, both of these were pretty rough compared to the originals. But what do you think? Which PSP spin-off was worse? Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier or Ratchet and Clank Size Matters? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next one.